Hello. Yes. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see we have a full room here, and we welcome everyone to the Council on Foreign Relations to hear from President Mutharika. As you know from your handout, he's been president of Malawi for about 15 months, and you know more. There's plenty of information there about his background, so I won't take up precious time with that. He and I are going to exchange for a few minutes before we call on you, but get your questions ready because we will be going to the audience shortly. Welcome, Mr. President. We're glad to have you here for your first visit to the Council.
Thank you.
And we'd like to start by asking you to share with us your experience over the first 15 months in office. What do you believe you've been able to accomplish? And you can also share with us some of the disappointments you might have encountered, because they're always there in the job that you have.
Yes. Thank you very much. First of all, good morning to you all. I'm very glad to be here. As you know, in the interest of transparency, that I lived here for over 50 years. I first came here as a graduate student, unable to go back home because of the political situation there. For the next 50 years, I worked in this country as a professor of law at one of your leading universities until I became an endowed professor. In 2009, I resigned to go back I retired actually, to go back to Malawi, where I ran for office and became a member of parliament. And then I became a Minister of Justice, Minister of Education, and Minister of Foreign Affairs. In 2011, our president died. So I was suddenly thrown into the opposition, and I'm sure you know the story of that. And then I ran for president in 2014, and here I am 15 months later. So I'm very glad to be here. As I say, I lived here for a long time. I always hoped that I'd be invited to the Membership Council on Foreign Relations. It never happened, but I'm glad now to come in through the back door. I can see some of my friends here, Steve and others. So I'm very glad to be here. Malawi, as you know, is in Southern Africa, a country of 50 million people. It became independent in 1964. For the first 30 years, we had a dictatorship. In 1994, we had third-term democracy. We have since had 5 presidents, and I'm the 4th elected president. So we do have democracy now, but it's a challenge to run democracy in a situation where traditions for democracy are not there. In the African situation, as you know, we have the chief. We don't have a vice chief or deputy chief. The chief runs the country. So that's a tradition. What is really to opposition and so forth. But when democracy came, we we all struggled for independence together, but we're supposed to divide into 2 groups. One running the government and the other one opposing the government. So it's very difficult, sort of artificial. So we've had a very different situation nurturing democracy. But in the process, we are finding our new democracy. Now, let me say this first of all, that in 1994, we adopted the Democratic Constitution, and I was one of the authors of the Constitution. What we did was to adopt the American system of government, presidential system, but at the same time whereby the president elected for a term of 5 years and can be elected for another term. But at the same time also adopted a parliamentary system in the sense that members of the cabinet are drawn from parliament and there's no limitation. So it's a mixture. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work because of the contradictions that exist in that kind of system. However, we managed to create a number of democratic institutions. For example, the Human Rights Commission, a very important body, and also the Ombudsman. We have those bodies, and also Anti-Corruption Bureau that are supposed to assist us in the governance of the country, and so far it's working quite well. Now, on the economic front, I think this is where the challenges are. Some of you may have read in the newspapers that 2 years ago, there was a situation in the government whereby the previous government was involved in massive looting of the treasury. known as Cashgate, after the Watergate, of course, Cashgate here. So I had the situation whereby the government is pretty much bankrupt. The donors left because of the Cashgate. They left, and the donors used to provide 40% of the current budget. They left. So I had to run a government with a budget minus 40%. It has been extremely difficult. How do you do it? So we started by, first of all, shrinking the government. I decided to reduce the government from a cabinet of about 35 people to a cabinet of 18 ministers. So that helped to save a lot of money. We reduced from 25 ministries to 18 ministries. Then we cut back spending, especially travel, that every minister, including the president, can travel only outside 3 times a year and cannot stay more than 2 weeks. I'm sure my ministers don't like that, but they are tolerating that, and I think it's working quite well in that front. Now, we are trying to bring foreign investment in Malawi. With the departing of the donors, we thought to embark on a massive attraction of investment. So we're not doing that. We had a very important conference in July this year, an investment conference, and we are trying to change the legal system, our laws, to make sure that investors are attracted. As you know, investors are concerned about two things. First of all, about a market, and secondly, about security, their own security. With respect to market, Malawi is a country of only 15 million people. So somebody says, look, why should I invest in such a small market? Unfortunately, Malawi is part of a larger market. We are part of the Southern Africa Development Community, common market for Eastern Southern Africa and the Africa Inter-Apartheid Trade Area. That alone brings in about 305 million people. We are also access to American market through the AGOA. And therefore, bigger market. We have access to the European market through what they call EBA, everything but arms initiative, European market. And also we have access to the Chinese market, Japanese market, and Indian market through bilateral agreements. So when you add, it's a huge market. So investors should not worry that it will be a small market. No, on security. I think this is a major concern because I'm sure you read all sorts of stories about Africa, insecurity and so forth, dictatorships. But I think Africa is changing now. I know the Africa was seen as a burden, but I think now it's seen as an opportunity because we have embraced. I was talking Wall Street last year, I was here. I said that 20 years ago, as a radical young student, I considered capital an enemy. I would not have gone to Wall Street then. But we have since changed. Capital is now a friend. We have decided that the private sector, both domestic and international, is going to be a part of the process of development in Malawi. So capital is welcome. Now, with respect to the concern by investors, let's say the second concern is about security. Their own security, physical security, but also commercial security. In the case of physical security, I've ensured that investors will be safe at home, at their place of work, and in between. We'll make sure that the maximum physical security. And we're doing that by increasing the police, improving the security situation. Now, with respect to commercial security, the investors now are quite secure. No more nationalizations that used to have in the 70s, quite safe now. And we have a lot of legal system, which is very protective. We're changing the administrative structures to make them more attractive. Before, it used to take 95 days from the time you applied for a license, investment license, to the time it's actually granted. Now it takes only 5 days. In most cases, I think the Minister of Commerce here would confirm, in most cases, within 5 days, we can actually have an investment. So there is security there. We have the rule of law. We have a viable judicial system. But also entered into a number of bilateral and multilateral agreements to protect foreign investment. A good example is the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes of the World Bank. I'm probably the only sitting president in the world, I'm sure I am, who is also a member of the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes of the World Bank as an active member, both on the conciliation and also on the arbitration. So we have the rule of law, and so there's SEF there. At the international level, we are participants very much in the international system within the region, but also beyond in the African situation, but also in the United Nations. We participate in the United Nations, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and various multilateral institutions. So we are very much now moving our country into the global constitutional framework. We're doing our best. Sometimes there are problems with meeting some of the international standards, like standards of human rights and rule of law. Sometimes we have difficulties, but we are doing our best. But in some cases, there are some of the international standards that we find difficult to accept because of our own traditions. But we're working on those things to make sure that Malawi becomes part of the global economic and political system. Maybe I should stop here. I didn't know that it was going to be an impromptu. I'd prepared a speech which I thought I was going to read on democratization, but maybe next time, if you invite me again, I'll read this speech.
We'll be glad to take your speech and make it available. I'm sure a lot of people.
This time
like
I'm
to see
glad.
it.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, we'd be glad to take that speech and make it available. But I'm glad we can have this conversation. And I wanted to pick up on one of your first points about the challenges that you face as a result of the withdrawal of donors. The British government, I think, sponsored an audit, which has been published now, and I'm wondering what the impact of that has been, and how are you able to repair the relationship with donors?
Yeah, we're trying, yes, indeed. In fact, they put a number of conditions for replying. One of them was that we should cut back spending, which I've done, as I mentioned earlier. Cut back as a lean government, cut back on spending, and we're saving money there. And also reform the economic system, the financial system. We're reforming that to have more accountability, more auditing, and so forth. We're doing that. The donors, actually there are two types for budget support. We had the bilateral donors, which were Britain, Germany, and Norway, and Ireland. For multilateral donors, it was the World Bank, European Union, basically, and the African Development Bank. They are all left. I think I've met all the conditions we asked to make. I think I've met them. But only the African Development Bank has come back. I have a feeling that they will never really come back. I think the time has come when the donors themselves facing difficulties in their own countries, their own economic situations, their own taxpayers. There's no constituency really, whether in here or Europe, for foreign aid anymore. So that's the reality now. But we have good relations in the sense that we want investors from these countries to come to Malawi and invest. But in terms of direct aid, no. I think, I'll be very honest, I think it's over as far as budget support is concerned. Yeah.
And what about corruption? You had there was 2 months ago, I guess, the murder of a senior official of the Anti-Corruption Bureau, and there's still a lot of reports about corruption in your government as well as previous ones.
Yes.
Are you is there an upward motion against corruption, or is it something you can't get rid of?
No, we can get rid of it. We can. We have a very strong. I appointed a very strong director. I fired the previous one. This man worked with Deloitte and Touche for 18 years. He's an economist, a financial person, and specializes in money laundering and fraud. So he's now catching out on people. Many people are being arrested. Many people are being charged. Many people are being imprisoned already. So he's working well. With respect to Mr. Njawunja, the number 3 man in the Anti-Corruption Bureau, it's a very strange case, very complicated, because it looked like the killing was very, very clever and very professional. So we're working on that. Well, there are some leads. We think that there'll be a breakthrough. But we are fighting corruption, no question about it. But there'll always be corruption, I suppose, in every society. in the sense that there will be some people who always want to, to have shortcuts to get riches. But I think there are serious penalties if you are caught. I can assure you that. And they know that I will not tolerate, as my government will not tolerate corruption.
And there have been a number of trials that started, I think, before you came into office, but a number of people have been convicted.
Indeed.
Maybe 60 or 70?
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed. We're so convicting them about over 120 people
Okay.
under investigation and some being tried, including our former Attorney General and Minister of Justice, as I say now, under trial, and many others. So, yes. And I've said that there are no sacred cows. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're corrupt, you're going to get you. That's the policy at the moment.
You mentioned the strengthening of democracy in Malawi. In democracies, one of the key things is that the losers can continue to operate and have a role. You've been in opposition yourself. What about your predecessor, Joyce Banda? She's not in the country now. Is she welcome to come back?
Very much so. She's very welcome to come back. In a way, it's a very sad situation. What happened, as you know, she succeeded, my brother,
Your brother, yeah.
under the Constitution. And then, of course, she went as an opponent. Trumped up charges of treason. I was in prison for that, being tried while I was campaigning. These charges were unfounded after we won the election. Very interesting. Through handover power, I invited her to come as normal to hand over power to me. She refused. And Army commander handed over the symbol, which is a sword, to me. And so has refused to participate. I know what you're saying because she's here. She's right here in New York. And she's telling people that I'm persecuting her. There's absolutely no truth whatsoever at all. And however, I'll say that, and I'll be very frank on this, I'll say that the casket happened during her administration. She was the president. Now, when this happened, and the purpose of this massive theft of money was to fund her political party for the campaign. So we have said whoever was involved in Cashgate, no matter who it is, if they're found to have been involved, then they'll be tried. And the rule of law will prevail. But it will be if somebody has broken the law. But nobody will be persecuted for political reasons. So I'm going beyond that. I know what it's like to be persecuted. I went through that for 2 years. And I don't want to repeat that. We must move away from that to more tolerance. So she's welcome to come anytime. And if you meet her, I know she's attending the Clinton initiative tomorrow. If you happen to meet her, ask her that she's very much welcome to come back home. We need her there to contribute to the building of the new Malawi.
Do former presidents in Malawi have pensions and benefits of any kind, security?
Yeah, they do. They do. In fact, they're entitled to about 2/3 of their former income. They're entitled to 1 or 2 vehicles, some security, personal assistant, some household person. So they're quite secure. And all that is tax-free, so they're quite secure. Yeah.
And so she has those things?
Huh?
And she's been extended those benefits?
Yeah, most of them they have been extended, but some of them are being worked out. You see, it's complicated. My brother died 2 years ago. The family still has not received the death benefits yet, simply because the process is very complicated. And when you had a history, when we drafted the former President's Act, we thought that we would be talking about retired presidents. We did not know that at some point a serving president would die. So we faced a situation where there was no president and the law was not very clear. So what I'm saying is she has received some of the benefits, the house she has, and all the vehicles she has. I'm sure about the chief secretary can confirm where the chief secretary can confirm that she has received those benefits. But the others she will receive when she gets back home, The security, for example, she has to be at home. We can't send security people to New York to protect her here. I don't think the U.S. government will allow somebody to come other than the Secret Service. So, but she's welcome.
So I want to turn to the economy and start with the situation with food. You made a national address very recently in which you told the Malawian people that there were at least 2.8 million suffering from hunger, and that you think the number is maybe even higher and could get worse.
Yeah.
So what have you been what are you doing to address that situation? And tell us a little bit about what the cause of it is.
Yeah, what happened was in February, actually January 13th, it started raining, and we thought it was just normal rain. That's the rainy season. And suddenly it turned out that this was the worst rain in the history of Malawi. So the complete disaster, flooding, over 100 people were swept, 160 people were swept away, another 200 missing. Everything was destroyed. The whole infrastructure, the southern part of the country. The northern part of the country, complete drought. Now, this is a very strange phenomenon. I know tomorrow at the UN we'll be talking about climate change. And this is a typical example of this phenomenon, that Malawi is a country which is about 300, about 700 miles long. And about 50 miles wide. Half of it, rain, flooding, the other half, absolutely no rain at all. As a result, we lost about 60% of our crop. So it's a different situation indeed. We expect close to 3 million people. We have no food. Now, I made an appeal, as you said, 2 days ago. The day I left on Monday, and I must say I'm very grateful that the U.S. government has responded with $50 million US dollars. Actually, we need $146 million, and Mr. Kramer, if you have a retirement fund, you are quite welcome to contribute to.
Thank you very much.
To that fund. But on a more serious note, we are looking for $146 million. We got $50 million from the Americans today. So that's a beginning, and we expect more donations from other governments, but also the private sector, both in Malawi and outside. And I've assured the Malawi people that under my watch, nobody will die from hunger. Nobody will. So we are handling the situation, and I think we'll be fine.
I'm sure this is a further strain on your economy. You've had a bit of a downturn in the growth rate. What do you foresee in terms of growth and in 2015 and going forward?
Yeah, I think it's going to be much lower than we were expecting, about 6 point something, but I think it's going to be less than that, maybe 5%. There was some growth because of the problems of the currency, which is weak at the moment because the dollar has been too strong, so the currencies are affected. So it's affecting that inflation and high prices and high interest rates, all the macroeconomic conditions. We're trying to control those, and we hope that by the end of the year, we're praying that the rainy season is coming in January. That won't have the same situation. I hope, for God's sake, I hope this is the last time it happens. If it dies, then you have a real problem in our hands. We are praying that we're beginning to rebuild now. We're beginning to reconstruct. We have a clear department of disaster management and resilience, and we're trying to create a situation, construction whereby damming some of the rivers, that if this happens again, we won't have this water sweeping out into the Lake Malawi. That through the construction of these dams and so forth, we'll be able to contain the water into the lake. So we're trying to do that. But it will be a long process, and it's expensive, but we're working on that.
And this puts a strain on efforts to attain the development goals, of course, which is one of the things you're discussing here in New York this week. Could you say a bit about what's going on in Malawi on, let's say, maternal and child health, on education, those kind of issues?
Yeah. We did our best. You know, the MDGs, how many were there? 8, right? There were 8. I think we are a bit unrealistic in that we do not look at the supply side. When you said free primary education, we didn't think about the training of teachers, infrastructure, buildings. when he said medical health, we didn't think about hospitals and doctors. So it's not realistic, I think. That's why it didn't succeed as well as we hoped it would. In Malawi, we have met 4 of the 8 goals. Were made 4 of them. We didn't meet the others. We have done better than most countries. Now we're going to be discussing the 17 SDGs, as you say, beginning tomorrow. I think we'll be more realistic. The problem is really resources, because the position taken at Addis Ababa 2 months ago, and it will be continued here, is that most cases that all these goals, the funding must be based on domestic mobilization of resources. Now that's fine, but for a country like Malawi, it might be easier to mobilize the kind of resources, the kind of money that's required to fund the goals, the 17. So tomorrow, beginning tomorrow, we'll be making a case. We'll be arguing, obviously, with our counterparts that we still need some sort of external resources. That it should be, while domestic mobilization is obviously commendable, and that should be the direction in the long run, that we also need actually infusion of capital from outside sources. So we'll try to make a case on that, but we're very excited about the new goals, and with the 169 targets. And we hope that in 15 years we'll achieve those. We're very excited, include the AIDS. I'll be chairing a panel on AIDS, the 1990, hoping to achieve end the AIDS pandemic by 2030. So I'm very concerned about that, but also children nutrition, gender equality, and the youth empowerment. We're working on those. As you know, Africa is the youngest continent. 70% of the population in Africa is under 25. And of that population, maybe over 80% may not be well educated and may not be able to find jobs. So I'm facing a real challenge in how to integrate this huge population, how to empower it into the economy with limited resources and limited institutions and limited job opportunities. So we'll be working on those. And myself, I've been appointed global youth champion. And I was also my colleagues that I consider myself very young now, although I'm over 70, because of my position as a youth. I feel young and dealing with the youth now, but we're working on those things. So there will be very interesting, serious discussions this week. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take questions now. I know there are a number of people here who would like
Sure.
to ask of you, and so I'll start on this side of the table, right here.
Mr. President, my name is Paul Tierney. I have an investment company focused on Africa and also an economic development organization, a not-for-profit one, TechnoServe. And my question is, what are your priorities? What do you think, not donations, but for foreign direct investment, what are some of your priorities? And where do you think that investment will come from? India, China, Europe, the United States?
Yeah, very good. On the priorities, I wish we have brought after the Obama meeting last year, I instructed the minister to prepare a compendium of all the bankable projects, and we have 123 bankable projects that are available in that book. Now, in terms of priorities, first of all, power. We need power. We have a power deficit. At the moment, we're going to produce up to 350 megawatts and a lot of blackouts. Now, if we're going to attract the investment, we need power. So investment in the energy sector is very important. Secondly, infrastructure, obviously, the roads and the bridges, those kinds of things, investing in that. And then agriculture, being an agricultural country, would like people to come in and invest, add more value in the many crops we have and others. Now we're moving into other crops, legumes and so forth. Big market for that globally. And we'd like people to invest, add value to that. But there are also areas like education where we need investors. So it's a whole range of sectors that are really ripe for investment. In terms of, but they're all priorities. But you see, my brother used to say everything is a priority in Malawi, but we have priorities within priorities. So power is certainly one, infrastructure, agriculture, and mining. I've discovered that Malawi may have huge deposits of minerals. We have uranium, as you know, but we think we have gold, rare earth, niobium, and so many others. So the mining sector will be important, but for that to really function, we need power. It takes so much power. Now, where are the investors coming from? They're here from all over the world, as far as we're concerned. Our traditional friends, which is the United States, Western Europe, Britain, those are obviously the traditional ones. But we're having new investors now. The Chinese are investing. We have the so-called BRICS countries. And Brazil is one of the biggest investment in Malawi at the moment that we negotiated when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs. $2 billion investment in the railroad system. It's from Brazil, Vale Logistics. So those are the new emerging economies. In India, also coming in the new economy. So it's a whole range. And I've always said that they are not mutually exclusive, that everybody's welcome to come there for the benefit. So it's quite open, and as I've said, that we have set in a regime, regulatory, administrative, which will make sure that everybody is secure. Yeah.
Speaking of power.
Yes.
Speaking of power.
We're expecting you to come.
I know, yeah.
You're supposed to come.
Please
I'm coming.
introduce yourself.
Yeah, Paul Hanks. I'm the Chief Executive of Symbion Power, based in Washington. I, of course, know President Mutharika since he came into office, and we've been looking at doing a couple of small biomass power projects in Malawi. But that's not the question I wanted to really ask about. As far as I know, there's quite a large deficit of megawatts in Malawi, even today.
Yes.
And about 90% thereof of the power capacity is hydro. I've heard lots of different stories about coal, about different types of energy, about interconnections from Mozambique. What is the current plan for addressing the deficit of power in Malawi? Because those small biomass plants is not going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in what is the large scale base load, because solar, as we know, is not base load. It works during the daytime, and wind is not base load. So what base load power solution is Malawi looking at to get out of this situation that it's in right now?
Yeah. First of all, you're right. In fact, 100% really, maybe 99% is hydro. As you know, we had problems. When we had the floods, there was all silt, and all the turbines stopped, and we went down to only 90 megawatts. It was a terrible situation. Right now, during the summer, water levels have gone down in the lake and also Shere River. As a result, about 90 megawatts we are deficit now. So out of the 351, we're actually minus 90. So it's quite serious. That seems to be the main power source at the moment, but we'd like to diversify. We'd like to go into coal. You see, coal, I know in the Western countries it's not fashionable because it's not that clean energy, but we'll try to make sure that it's as clean as possible. Coal, and in the western part of Malawi near the Mozambique border, a lot of coal. And we hope we can use a part of that. And because the dust, the coal dust, to make bricks for the housing subsidies we have adopted. So we'll do that, coal, and we were also hoping solar. Now, as you know, the trouble with solar is initially it's very expensive, but also it takes a lot of space. You see, 1 megawatt, you need 1 hectare of land, and that's a lot of space. To do that, we're still trying to do that. Solar, and of course biomass. We expect by now that Symbion will be there. I know you sent the lady from South Africa, but that was some months ago. We haven't yet heard from you. I think you were in Tanzania that time. She said you were in Tanzania at that time. But you are welcome, as you know. And I think you were thinking about 40 megawatts, 50 at the initially, megawatts, and also a connection with Mozambique. That part, when you and I talked about the eastern part, almost along the lake, connect with the Tanzania system. That's viable, but also be connecting with Mozambique and Zambia. If you do that, then eventually I would like to get into the Southern African power pool system. But we do not do that unless actually the majority of generation is within Malawi. We don't be like a country like Italy, for example, where we totally depend on another country for power. We don't want to do that. So we want at least maybe 70-80% to be within Malawi, and then we can sell and buy, whenever there is a surplus to their neighboring countries. So we're trying to do that, and we hope we'll succeed. And then other off-grid, the smaller companies, some of the small ones, include the portable ones and others, will not be connected to the grid, but can be used in the rural areas, very useful for rural areas. So we're also doing that. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, I think that you'll hear a changing mantra over here about coal.
Mm-hmm.
There are 600 plus coal-fired power stations in the United States. There are more than 600 in China. And every time anybody mentions putting one coal-fired power plant in one African country, we all have a heart attack. What's crazy about that is, Africa has these indigenous fuel sources. It has coal and many other things that can be used.
Yeah.
And often you see these emergency power situations coming in where they bring in diesel. And diesel produces worse emissions, if not controlled properly, than coal-fired power plants.
Yeah.
So I think what we're looking at the moment is to use indigenous fuel sources, whatever they may be, in the countries in Africa. And I think you'll hear people over here now, I've been hearing it, saying what Africa needs is power. And that's the most important thing.
Yes.
Thanks,
Yes.
Paul.
No, that's very true, yeah.
Gail?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yes.
there. Thank you. I know nothing about the press in Malawi, and I wonder if you could tell us a little something about it. Certainly, if you're trying over a long run to build a democratic culture, the press is a huge factor. What can you tell us about the press in Malawi in terms of its impact on popular thinking?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's right. The press is completely free. Now, before 1994, as I mentioned earlier, we had a very authoritarian government. In fact, there was no free press. It was all government controlled, including the radio station. In fact, the former government did not want television, only radio. Television came out since 1994. The press is completely free. It might be too free. If you read the way they attack me, I'm sure you check on the internet, you'll find that they're attacking viciously, and no single person has been arrested. No member of the press has been arrested for attacking the government or whatever. So they're completely free. All we ask is that they should be responsible, but also they should be they should contribute to the development process. They should not just be destructive. But no, it's free, and we intend to keep it that way, as far as we're concerned, yeah.
Professionalization of the press is a major challenge across Africa, but it's happening.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, Joel Mentor from Barclays.
Okay.
I've read some interesting and inspiring stories about some of the Malawi citizens engaging in reforestation efforts, crop diversification, developing local self-help institutions. So I'm wondering, what's your administration's strategy towards finding some of these local successes and investing in those and taking advantage of local initiative?
Yeah. Could you repeat the last part of it, the first part of your question? You have heard about?
So there's basically a lot of stories of how Malawi citizens in your country are coming up with their own solutions to some of these problems in terms of food insecurity.
Oh, yes,
so
yes.
reforestation, crop diversification, and so forth. So in terms of just as opposed to just a centralized approach, how do you reinforce those local successes?
Yeah. No, we're trying to, good question. First of all, we do have, we've started a system of decentralization. The things were too centralized. Now we're decentralizing. For the first time in the history, we had the tripartite elections. This last time for central government, for the president, parliament, and local authorities. So the first time we have people at the local level, and that's helping in terms of what you are saying. Now, in terms of find local solutions to real local in the sense of particular area, particular locality, do that together with NGO. But I will say that, for example, if you are, say, an NGO, non-government organization from, say, Norway, but try to do those things within the national plan. The problem we have sometimes with this NGO is that I'm a member of parliament, and I was a member of parliament before. You go to a constituency, and you find that somebody's building a bridge across the river because he told some chief, and they agreed we need a bridge there. Although maybe a prenatal, clinic would have been better. So what I've said is fine, localize, but let's do that within the national plan. Now, on the question of we are mentioning reforestation, that's a very important problem. I was here last year addressing, I think, Paul, you're there, at the congressional caucus in Washington. We are down, the country has been destroyed over the years through careless cutting of trees and so on and so forth. And we are trying now to reforest a new conservation policy. Planting more trees, also protecting the animals. But we feel without that, in fact, the flooding took place to some extent. Well, it didn't take place because of that, but it was destructive because we had destroyed trees and all those kinds of things, and everything was washed away. So we are trying to reforest the country, to build more trees and along the river banks and so forth, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah.
I have? Okay, thank you.
We go to another side of the room. Down at the end, the lady right there.
If you could mention your names, I would like
Yes.
to. I know many of you by name, but if you can
Everybody.
tell us who you are, it will be helpful, yeah.
Okay. Graciana del Castillo from the Ralph Bunche Institute for International Studies. Many of us admire your brother as president. He moved the country from hunger to a net exporter.
Right.
And I was surprised you didn't mention at all his policies that concern a large part of the population that is rural in Malawi. One of the things that happened during that period was that he had to defy many of the policies of the IMF and the World Bank and all that.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting how it transformed the country in very few years with policies that we in the US and in Europe, we use them for our own farmers, but are forbidden for countries in the developing world.
Yes.
Could you please say more on that, please?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and because in a way I was part of the process of when 2004, when you won, I was there and talking about what to do about hunger. So you decided to have subsidize maize, but also the seeds. Now, we were told that subsidies are very bad, and there was opposition, you correctly said, from the IMF or the World Bank. But we're arguing that the Western countries, Japan, there's heavy subsidy, Germany, here, the mixed support programs, since 1910 you have been supporting. Then they were saying, if you go to rural areas in this country, those airlines can be, rest assured that they're being subsidized by somebody else. So they tell us free market forces only should operate, there should be no subsidy. Now, we're saying no, that's not quite correct. I think the World Bank came around, even European Union after that, and agreed that some kind of subsidy was good as a temporary measure. It was not to be permanent, just like your welfare system here. And the idea was we enable a person eventually to stand on their feet. So the idea was this, that we subsidize, for example, your crops, your maize. We hope you'll grow enough maize so that you'll be able to sell part of it. So next year, you'll not need the subsidy. That's the idea. Now, it has not come out as well as we wanted to because of other domestic and other conditions, other demographic factors. But that's the idea. I think it has worked well. You're right that there was hunger, 2001, 2002, but from 2007-8, we're exporting maize. We even sending donated maize overseas and rice. One country, we donated 100,000 tons of rice to a country overseas which was facing floods. So we're able to do that. And now, because of these conditions I mentioned, the floods and the drought, things have now changed. It's now uncertain. I tell you what, when I was growing up, the rains used to come in October. And by Christmas time, we're eating green maize, which we used to enjoy a lot those days. Nowadays, the rains don't come until January. 3 months, if they come at all. And if they come, there is so much force as happened this year, or no rains at all. So in fact, we're now moving into irrigation. My brother started what they call the green belt. We were planning to put over 500 hectares in each region, 500,000 hectares in each region under irrigation. If that happens, we'll move away completely from red-fed agriculture to irrigation. So we're doing those kinds of things. So there's no intervention by the government in these kinds of things. We don't believe that government should be totally indifferent or oblivious to these things that only market forces should operate. I think there's going to be some kind of here, you remember during Reagan administration, he used to say that government was the enemy and so forth. But in 2007, come 2007, 8, we found big companies, General Motors now going to the government for support. Because in the end, I think government, every country has a role to play, even a sort of free market economy, some role for the government. So we're doing the same, but along the way, we'll try gradually to allow the private sector, individual, to take a bigger role than the government is doing at the moment. But there will always be some role, I think, for the government. Yeah.
This corner here.
Michaela Walsh from Women's World Banking. I kind of refer to the big elephant in the room, and I'd be curious as to, among your policies, what policies do you have to assure that women's voices are involved in the policies going forward in Malawi?
Yeah. Wonderful. That's a very good point. I think I myself personally just been appointed the UN as he for she champion, global champion. And my minister here of gender, she's very, very active in women empowerment. We have a number of private institutions to empower women, but I'm glad for Women Bank that you mentioned. Well, we're very interested in that. I think you have some operations in Malawi, I believe. Right? They do. Yeah. So we're very interested in that, in empowering women. First of all, a very interesting story. In 1997, a number of women came to Malawi to see my brother, and he said, look, under SADC would like to support 30% participation by women across the board, in government, policy. So my brother said, no, I cannot support you. 30%, no, I cannot support you. So they were taken aback. So he said, I'll support you only 50%, not 30%. That's how the 50 thing was born in Africa, and we're supporting that. I personally convinced Michelle Bachelet, president of Chile, when she was that time head of UN Women, to open the first UN Women office in Africa, in Malawi. So we are committed, no question about it. We're committed to women, but sometimes we don't succeed, because sometimes, for example, in Parliament, when I was in Parliament, we had 40% women. This last election, it went down to 19? 22%. For some reason, in spite of all this money coming in, NGOs to support women, it really went down. We don't understand that, and we are looking into that. Various authorities have looked at the situation in Uganda and also in Rwanda, where maybe you see set up constituencies and say these ones only women can compete in the primaries. Maybe that's the only way to do that. Now, that may raise some constitutional issues that we can resolve. Uganda has done it and Rwanda has done it. That may be the only way to do it, but because it's going down and down each time for factors that hard to explain. But it is difficult. But here in the Senate, how many women do we have? About 15? 20 maybe? In the U.S. Senate, anyone know? A small percentage. In the House, out of 35, you have about maybe 100, about 25%. So there's this global attitude towards women. I think that poor perception, we need to change it if the women are really going to really fully participate. Even at global level, I understand they're not talking about a possible woman secretary general. This coming one, I'm sure this week there will be a lot of discussions on that. Yeah. It's very exciting. If that happens, it will be a real model for the rest of the world. But so we are doing those things little by little, and we hope we can succeed. But groups like yours, we're in banking. That's so important to empower women economically, because if they're empowered economically, then I think they'll be able to succeed politically also, and not being dependent on their husbands or their fathers or their brothers or cousins. And so we're doing that.
So the council has a policy of ending on time, but we got a little bit of a late start thanks to the traffic.
German here has been trying so much.
All right. So if
in a blue shirt.
If the president's willing to stay a few more minutes,
that's okay.
I've been told we can extend a little bit.
5-10 minutes.
So you're calling on
this gentleman in a blue shirt.
Right.
They've been trying very hard the whole morning.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name's Earl Carr, representing Momentum Advisors, and I'm very proud to say my sister lives in Malawi, and she teaches, and she's been there for the last 7 years, teaching in the villages there as an educator. My question relates to the following. The role of Chinese investment in Africa has been quite controversial.
Yeah.
What is your view and perception of the role of Chinese investment in Malawi to develop the economy, and how would you describe the role of Chinese investment? How would you describe the perception of the ordinary citizens in Malawi? How do they perceive the perception of Chinese investment?
Well, I think for ordinary citizens is quite positive. The Chinese are mostly involved in infrastructure, basically. That's what they're doing. Buildings, roads, and those kinds of things. They are not involved in things that directly ties people. So they're not in direct contact with the people. The Western countries tend to invest in more social services, education, health, agriculture, and maybe more contact with the people. But so they complement each other, and we are very happy with this kind of arrangement. I was recently a guest at the World Economic Forum in Dalia about 3 weeks ago, and the chance to talk to both my Western friends and also Chinese friends. I think there's a feeling that they are not mutually exclusive. They're complementing each other because they're mostly in infrastructure. So in terms of perception, in Malawi at least, I don't think there's any negative attitude. Now, where is your sister working? Where in Malawi is she working? For long, okay. Wonderful. Good. Okay.
Okay, I'm told we can take one more question. Did you want to call on someone else, Mr. President?
No, it's just, for some reason I had a feeling that he's connected with Malawi. I don't know why. But it was just an instinct.
All right. Thank you.
Jeff Laurenti, I wonder, Mr. President, if you could give us a little more clarity on your thinking on the utility of these big United Nations exercises in setting development goals. You described the Millennium Development Goals as a bit unrealistic, like cutting poverty by half or whatever, and the Sustainable Development Goals now being proposed for ratification this coming week as more realistic. That calls for eliminating poverty in 15 years. To what extent did Malawians find over the past 15 years that international assistance donors actually coordinated their assistance based on those Millennium Development Goals? To what extent, now that you've lost the bilateral donors, have the multilateral donors, A, filled in the gap, and B, followed those goals? To what extent do you see even your national ministries implementing them? So is all this just a giant wind machine in New York? How do you see it translating into people's lives on the ground?
Yeah. First of all, let me clarify on the donors, the multilateral ones also left. Only African Development Bank came back. Now, to answer your question, I think there's an extremely important question as to why do you have these kinds of goals. But, you know, I think it's important to have these goals, these objectives, because then you can try to move towards them. So just like, you know, issues of human rights, and so forth. I think that they're important, but you're right. You see, some of the donors, I think especially in the social areas, AIDS, population, and so forth, I think that, and food security, I think they've worked honestly and tried to work together with with local institutions, local organizations. For example, AIDS, Malawi is one of the best success stories. I'll be chairing a panel, I think, tomorrow, because Malawi has done extremely well in the goals. For example, what they call Plan B, Option B, which is mother-to-baby transmission of AIDS, almost eliminated in Malawi, and one of the leading countries. And that has been done because international organizations, both governmental and private, have been active with us. In the economic area, I think this is where the problem really is, because in the end, it will be a question of resources. And we have to be realistic that we have a situation where the Western countries themselves are facing difficulties. In terms of difficulties, they can only give that much. So this is where the difficulty will be, how to achieve this. But I think the objective is a good one, that let's have these goals, 15 years, let's see where we are in 15 years. I think with respect to AIDS, I'm not convinced that in 15 years, I think AIDS will be over. It will be like the way leprosy was before, or smallpox, or whatever. It will be eliminated, I think. But the other areas, infant mortality and others, complete elimination of hunger, of poverty, those will be harder to achieve because they involve massive infusion of resources, which at the moment the global community may not be prepared to have. So we'll see what happens, but I'm excited about it. We'll see. The intention is a good one. The important thing, I think, was the fact that the international community, beginning with MDGs, for the first time, before that, the UN were just talking. It was mostly peace and security and the Russians and the veto and so forth. The UN now moved into socio-economic areas since the beginning of the MDGs. And that itself, I think, was important. And I think in the long run, it will probably be a positive thing. But I agree with you that it's going to be quite a challenge along the way. It will, yeah. Thank you very much. Wonderful question. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you being here and answering our questions and for being on the record.
Thank you.